Welcome back to Remnants of the Veil, Episode 7, The Visions, Prologue. The visions came at night, not simultaneously, not with warning. They arrived the way dreams arrive, sliding into consciousness through the gap between waking and sleeping, filling the mind with images that felt more real than the room around the dreamer. Each one was different, each one was specific, and each one carried the weight of something that was not imagined. The gate had been silent since the entity withdrew from its surface. No vibrations, no signals, no pale gold-white light pulsing. With meaning. It hung in the void the way it had hung for 12,000 years. Patient, ancient, waiting. On 3 ships, 3 leaders closed their eyes. None of them would open them the same. One, the Overlord's vision, Veilburn, stood in the Iron Hall. He knew it was not real. He knew he was aboard the Hammer, in his quarters, in the void near the Echo Gate. He knew this because he had fallen asleep with his longsword within arms, reach and the gate's shimmer behind his eyelids. But the Iron Hall was around him, the vaulted ceiling of dark stone, the weapons of dead overlords lining the walls in their mounts, the air thick with the smell of forge heat and the deep resonance of Vorkath's continental factories vibrating through the bedrock below. It was perfect. Every detail. The crack in the 3rd stone from the dais where Overlord Threk had slammed his fist during the clan wars. The scorch marks on the eastern wall where the rebellion of Gorvak had reached the inner sanctum before being put down. The way the light fell through the narrow windows at an angle that only happened during the dry season, when Vorkath's axial tilt brought the sun low enough to penetrate the fortress's defenses. Veilburn had stood in this hall 10,000 times. He knew it the way he knew the weight of his longsword, intimately, permanently, in his bones. The 5 clans were assembled. They stood in the semicircle, the arrangement that protocol demanded during a succession announcement. Each clan leader in their position, each one flanked by their honor guard, each one watching the dais with the careful attention of predators assessing whether the thing before them was food or threat. Veilburn recognized them, thorax scarred and massive, standing at the position of the first blade. Drekvol, old and cautious, at the second. Gravak, young and hungry, at the third. Kethis, silent and calculating, at the fourth. Vor, brutal and simple, at the 5th. 5 clans, 5 ambitions, 5 knives waiting for the moment to turn inward. And on the dais, not Veilburn, someone else. The figure was Drakauer. Larger than Veilburn, younger. The bone plating was thicker, denser, radiating a faint luminescence that Veilburn had never seen on Drakar-Chiton. Pale, not quite gold, not quite white. The figure held no weapon. It did not need one. The energy coming off its body made the weapons on the walls vibrate in their mounts. The dead overlord's blades were singing in the presence of something that transcended the strength of any of them. The new overlord. Veilburn watched the figure raise one hand and the 5 clans kneel. Not reluctantly, not politically. They knelt, because their bodies told them to. The same instinct that makes a lesser predator lower its head before a greater one. The new overlord did not command. It existed, and the command was implicit in the existence. The vision shifted. Veilburn saw himself, not on the dais, not in the hall. On the wall. His longsword, mounted beside the weapons of every overlord who had come before. The blade was clean. The mount was new. The position was final. He was dead. And the dominion was stronger than it had ever been. The vision did not tell him how he died. It did not show him pain or violence or the moment of transition. It showed him the result. His absence as the price of something greater. The transaction was clear. The currency was him. Veilburn reached out and touched the mounted longsword. The metal was cold. It had always been warm in his hand. The difference between a weapon carried and a weapon displayed, between a life lived and a life commemorated. The vision held him there for what felt like hours, standing before his own memorial, watching the clans serve an overlord who existed because he did not. Feeling the weight of a future that required his subtraction. Then the iron hall dissolved, and he was in his quarters, and the longsword was on the wall, and the gate shimmered outside the viewport, and everything was exactly the same except that Veilburn now knew how his story ended. He called for Thorok. The warlord arrived in full armor. Even at this hour, even in private, the warlord dressed for war. The cuts across his chest were visible above the armor's edge, sealed but not healed. He entered the quarters and stood at attention. Overlord. The gate sent me a vision, Veilburn said. He did not offer a seat. He did not soften the words. He delivered them the way he delivered every order, direct, unadorned, absolute. The next overlord of the Drakkar Dominion will receive power from the gate, real power, the kind that makes 5 clans kneel without being asked, the kind that makes every weapon in the Iron Hall sing. Thorok's eyes narrowed. The next overlord. Not me, the one who comes after me. The implication did not need to be spoken. Thorok processed it in silence, the particular silence of a Drakkar warrior calculating the distance between where he stood and where the ground would meet him, if it collapsed. How? Thorok asked. The vision did not show me how. It showed me the result. My sword on the wall, the new overlord on the dais, the clans unified under power that does not come from politics or tradition. And you believe it. I felt it. Thorok, the way I felt the entity's roots when it held me. The way I felt the Korvan creature's presence in the chamber. This was not a dream. This was a promise. A promise from what? The gate? The Aelith? Something else? Does it matter? The power is real. The cost is real. What I do with that? Information is what matters. Thorok was quiet for a long time. The hammer hummed around them. What are you going to do? Thorok asked. Tell the clans, all 5, everything I saw. That is a death sentence, Overlord. Every clan leader will hear that the next Overlord receives power, and every clan leader will begin calculating how to be the next Overlord. You will have 5 assassins in a room, and you will have just told them the reward for killing you. Yes, you want that. I want the Dominion to survive what is coming. If my death gives us an overlord strong enough to face it, then I will choose the manner and the meaning. I will not be found dead in my quarters by a poisoner. I will stand in the Iron Hall, tell the clans what the gate showed me, and let the strongest among them take what the gate offers. He paused. I have been overlord for 40 years. I have held the clans together through 30 campaigns, 2 rebellions, and the death of a monarch. I am tired, Thorok. And the galaxy is no longer a place where tired old warriors can hold things together with stubbornness and a good sword. Your sword killed a monarch. And the thing in that entity's chamber could kill me without moving. The scale has changed. The Dominion needs something I cannot give it. The gate is offering to provide it. The price is 1 old overlord. He looked at Thorok. Stand beside me when I address the clans. I will be there, Overlord. I know you will. You are the only one I trust to hear this and not start sharpening your blade. My blade is always sharp, Overlord. That has nothing to do with trust. Veilburn almost smiled. It was difficult to tell with Drakkar. Tomorrow, he said. I address the clans tomorrow. The captain's nightmare. Vasquez was on Bastion. He knew Bastion. He had lived there for 6 years before his commission. The hollowed-out asteroid that served as humanity's largest hub. Its corridors carved from rock, its atmosphere recycled through systems that were older than most of the people breathing it. He knew the smell of it, recycled air with a metallic undertone that newcomers noticed and veterans forgot. He knew the sound of it, the constant hum of environmental processors, the distant clang of maintenance work, the voices of 100,000 humans living on top of each other in a rock floating in the void. The Bastion in the vision was silent. The corridors were dark, not powered down dark, damaged dark. Scorch marks on the walls, blast damage. Pressure doors sealed across sections that had been decompressed. The environmental status boards that lined every major junction showed population readings for each sector. Sector by sector, the numbers read 0. Vasquez walked. His footsteps echoed in corridors that should have been crowded. He passed through the market district, empty, stalls overturned, goods scattered across the floor. Through the residential, blocks, doors open, quarters abandoned, personal belongings left behind by people who had left in a hurry or had not left at all. Through the command center, consoles dark, chairs empty, the main display frozen on the last tactical update. Before the power failed, the update showed human ships firing on human ships. The vision was not abstract, it was not symbolic. It was specific. Dates, fleet designations, the names of faction leaders who had ordered the strikes. The Consolidation fleet had fired on a freeborn convoy over a trade dispute that had escalated through 6 rounds of failed negotiation. The Freeborn had retaliated by seizing a colony world supply depot. The colony world had declared independence. 3 more had followed. Within a month, the Terran remnant had fractured along every fault line that had been growing since before Vasquez was born. He saw the battles, not from the outside, from the bridge of ships he recognized. The Defiance was there, in one of the later engagements, its chipped paint and crooked sensor array visible through the viewport of an opposing vessel. Someone had fired on his ship, someone human. He saw Bastion fall, not to aliens, not to the Drakkar or the Velithari or the Korvan, to humans. A faction fight over control of the station had escalated until someone decompressed 3 sectors rather than let them be captured by the other side. Entire sectors. Gone. Because 2 human leaders could not agree on who was in charge. The vision held him in the dark corridors for a long time. Long enough to feel the cold. Long enough to smell the residue of atmosphere that had been breathed by people who were no longer breathing. Long enough to understand, viscerally, what happened when humanity reached a crisis without a unified voice. Then the vision shifted. He stood in a room he did not recognize, clean, lit, functional, a long table, chairs, representatives from every human faction seated around it. Consolidation, Freeborn, colony worlds, mining guilds, military, civilian, all of them present. All of them listening, to him. He stood at the head of the table, not in his captain's uniform, in something else. Something that carried authority he had not earned through rank but through action. The people at the table did not love him. Some of them clearly hated him. But they were there and they were listening, because the alternative was the dark corridors and the empty sectors and the status boards reading 0. The vision showed him building it, not in broad strokes, in detail. The meetings that went badly. The negotiations that nearly collapsed. The faction leaders who had to be convinced, and the ones who had to be removed. The word removed sat in the vision like a stone, heavy, unavoidable, meaning exactly what it meant. He saw Senator Hargrove. She stood in his path, not with malice, not with corruption, but with the immovable certainty of a person who believed in process above all else. She demanded votes. She demanded procedure. She demanded the slow, careful construction of consensus that had served the Consolidation faction for decades. And she was not wrong. In a stable galaxy, she would have been the wisest person in the room. The galaxy was not stable. Every day she delayed was a day the factions drifted further apart. Every committee she convened was a committee that accomplished nothing while Bastion's fault lines deepened. And the vision showed him, with horrible clarity, the moment when her insistence on process tipped the balance from unity to fracture. The vision did not tell him what to do about her. It showed him 2 futures. In one, she remained. In the other, she did not. The vision was not subtle about which future had dark corridors and which had a lit room. Vasquez felt the weight of it settle into him the way cold settles into metal, slowly, completely, changing the fundamental temperature of everything it touched. The vision released him. He was in his quarters. The lights were off. His hands were shaking. He sat in the dark for 3 hours. He did not call anyone. He did not record a log. He did not reach for a drink or a distraction or the comforting routine of checking fleet status. He sat, and he thought about the man he had been when the Defiance arrived at the gate. a competent captain with no political ambitions, and a talent for standing between things that wanted to destroy each other. The vision had shown him a different man, a man who made decisions that could not be undone, a man who removed obstacles, a word that meant something very specific when the obstacle was a person. He thought about Hargrove. He had met her twice since her arrival. She was intelligent. She was principled. She genuinely believed that democracy was the mechanism by which humanity would survive. And the vision had shown him that her belief, correct in theory, fatal in practice, would cost 40,000 lives on Bastion and the coherence of the entire Terran remnant. Could he do what the vision implied? Could he become the man at the head of that table, the one who had built a government on a foundation that included something unforgivable? He did not know. The not knowing was worse than either answer. Eventually he stood. He walked to the bridge. The skeleton crew was on duty. He sat in the command chair and opened a personal log. He wrote one line. "The gate showed me what I need to become. I do not know if I can survive becoming it." He closed the log. He stared at the viewport. The gate shimmered in the distance, patient and silent, offering nothing and demanding everything. A high resonance calling. Sivillith did not dream. She burned. The Veilburn had been a slow erosion for weeks. Silver lines spreading across her skin, her voice thinning, her perception deepening at the cost of her physical resilience. She had treated it as damage, as the price of communion, as something to be endured and managed and ultimately survived. The vision showed her that she had been wrong about all of it. She was in the resonance chamber, but it was not the resonance chamber she knew, not the crystal-walled room aboard the Luminarch Aetherius where she had spent decades in communion with the Veil Stream. This resonance chamber was larger, older. The crystal walls extended beyond what her eyes could measure, curving upward and outward into a space that had no ceiling, only more crystal, more light, more frequency layered upon frequency until the air itself was dense with meaning. She stood at the center and she could hear everything. The Veil Stream, the layer she had spent her life learning to perceive, was there. Familiar. The surface of an ocean she had been swimming in for decades. But beneath it, visible for the first time, the deeper layers opened like geological strata viewed in cross-section, each one a different frequency, each one carrying different information. The deep current, vast, slow, ancient, pulsed beneath the Veil Stream like a heartbeat beneath skin, and beneath that, another layer, and another, each one older, each one deeper, each one more complex than the last. She could hear the harmonic, not the way Sivillith had sensed it from outside. The faint hum of Korvan consciousness bleeding into the Veil Stream. She could hear it clearly. Billions of minds singing in chorus, the most beautiful and terrifying sound she had ever perceived. She could feel individual monarchs in the network, vast intelligences, each one a symphony unto itself, connected in harmonies that shifted and evolved with every passing second. She could hear the deep thread, the Verdanthi's root network, slow and patient and ancient beyond measure, memories flowing through roots that spanned continents. The entity's thoughts, the continent-sized mind near the gate, processing information from the gate's reading, each thought taking hours to form and carrying the weight of millennia. And beneath everything, beneath the Veil Stream, beneath the deep current, beneath the harmonic and the deep thread and every frequency that every species had ever touched, she could hear something else. A frequency with no name. Old. Not just old the way the Aelith were old. Old the way stone is. Old the way void is old. Something that existed before the Aelith built their structures, before the deep current carried its first signal, before the Veil Stream formed. Something that was alive. Something that was aware. Something that had been waiting. She listened. The frequency resolved into impressions, not words, not images, but pure meaning, transmitted from a source so vast that receiving it felt like being held in a hand the size of a galaxy. The impression said, "You are the first of your kind to hear me." The vision shifted. She was back in the resonance chamber, the real one, aboard the Aetherius. But she could still hear the layers. All of them, simultaneously. The silver lines on her skin were glowing, not with reflected light, but with their own radiance, each line a channel, each channel carrying a different frequency, her body rewritten into an antenna that received signals no Velithari had ever been designed to receive. She looked at her hands. The silver lines traced her fingers, her palms, the tendons beneath her skin. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. They were permanent. The vision showed her. What would happen when the Velithari saw what she had become? She stood in the council chamber on Velathos, the oldest Velithari structure, crystal spires reaching into a violet sky, the seats of the 7 council members arranged in a circle around the speaker's platform. She stood on the platform. The silver lines covered her body, face, neck, hands, arms, and they glowed with a light that cast no shadows because it came from everywhere and nowhere. Half the council knelt, not figuratively, not in deference or protocol. They knelt because what stood before them was something they recognized from the oldest Velithari texts. The ones written before the Ascendancy had a name, before the council existed, when the Velithari were young and the Veil Stream was new. And the first resonance had touched frequencies that changed them forever. The texts spoke of a bridge, a being who could stand between the Veil Stream and what lay beneath it and translate one to the other. A prophet, a conduit. The text used a word that had no direct translation into common Velithari. It meant approximately, the one who hears the voice beneath the voice. 3 council members knelt. They wept. They called her by the name from the texts. 4 council members stood. They looked at her with an expression Sivalith had never seen on a Velithari face before. Not contempt, not disagreement, but horror. Deep, visceral, biological horror. To them, the silver lines were not channels. They were wounds. The glow was not divine light. It was the visible symptom of a mind being consumed by forces it was never meant to contain. What stood before them was not a prophet. It was a victim, a high resonant who had burned too deep and emerged not enlightened but broken, and who was now, through the force of her presence and the desperation of the times, leading others into the same fire. The schism was instantaneous. 3 who knelt, 4 who stood, and between them, Sivalith, who could hear both their arguments simultaneously because she could hear everything now and who understood, with the terrible clarity of someone standing in the exact center of a fracture, that both sides were right. She was being transformed. The transformation was real, and the power was real, and the ability to bridge frequencies was real. And the cost was also real. The Veilburn would not stop, the silver lines would keep spreading, and what she became at the end of the process might not be recognizable as Sivalith. The prophet and the victim were the same person. The miracle and the corruption were the same process. The only question was whether the result was worth the cost, and that question had no answer. Only perspectives. The vision held her in the council chamber for a long time, long enough to hear both sides argue, long enough to feel the ascendancy. 6,000 years of unified Velithari civilization begin to crack along a fault line that ran directly through her body. Then the vision released her. She was on the floor of the resonance chamber, the real one. The crystal walls pulsed with light she could now see had always been there. Hidden frequencies, invisible to every Velithari who had ever stood in. This room visible to her because the Veilburn had burned away the limitations that had kept them hidden. Kalindra was beside her. The attendant's golden eyes were wide. "You were glowing," Kalindra said. The silver lines, all of them, they were glowing. Sivalith sat up. Her body ached in places that did not correspond to muscles or bones, the ache of new channels being carved into biology that was resisting the changes. She could feel the Veil Stream. She could feel what was beneath it. She could feel the faintest impression of the nameless frequency at the bottom of everything, pulsing with the patience of something that had been waiting a very long time. "Kalindra," she said. Her voice was different, layered, as though it carried harmonics that had not been there before. "I need to tell you what I saw, and when I am done, you need to tell me honestly whether you think I am becoming something." or being destroyed. I will tell you honestly. You may not like what I describe. I have not liked anything that has happened since we arrived at this gate, High Resonant. That has not stopped me from standing beside you. Scythelith looked at her attendant, the woman who had blocked an Overlord's blade with Crystal and Will, who had broken her staff defending something that was not even her fight, who sat now with bandaged arms and exhausted eyes and showed no sign of leaving. She told her everything, the layers beneath the veil stream, the nameless frequency, the council splitting, the prophet and the victim being the same person. When she finished, Kalindra was quiet for a long time. Both sides are right, Kalindra said finally. Yes, you will do it anyway. It was not a question. I do not think I have a choice, Sivlith said. The Veilburn is not something I can stop. It is happening whether I embrace it or resist it. The only choice I have is whether to walk forward openly or be dragged forward in denial. Then walk forward, Kalindra said, and I will walk beside you. If the council calls it heresy, they can call it heresy to my face. They will. Good. I have been waiting for an excuse to tell the council what I think of them. Scythelith almost smiled. The silver lines on her face shifted with the expression, alive, responsive, part of her now in a way that made the distinction between transformation and corruption meaningless. The ascendancy will split, Scythelith said. Then we will build something better in its place, Kalindra said. Or we will burn trying. Either way, we do not stop. The resonance chamber hummed with frequencies that only Scythelith could hear, and beneath them all the nameless voice at the bottom of everything pulsed once, a single patient impression that might have been approval, or might have been hunger. Scythelith could not tell the difference. Not yet. 4. The morning after. Aboard the hammer of Veilburn, the Overlord addressed the 5 clans. The communication was not a broadcast, it was a Drakor war council. Each clan leader connected via secure channel from their respective flagships, their faces rendered in the amber holographic displays that the Drakor used for command-level communication. 5 faces, 5 ambitions, 5 sets of calculations running behind 5 sets of eyes. Veilburn stood on the bridge of the hammer. Thoruk stood behind him, arms crossed, the parallel scars across his chest visible above his armor's edge. The warlord's presence was deliberate. Veilburn's statement to the clans that his first blade already knew what was coming. The gate sent me a vision, Veilburn said. He spoke in the old language, formal, stripped of nuance, each word carrying the weight of tradition. I will not interpret it. I will describe what I saw. You will draw your own conclusions. He described it. The Iron Hall, the new Overlord on the dais. The power that made weapons sing. His own sword on the wall. He did not describe his death. He did not need to. The 5 clan leaders understood succession. They had been studying it since before Veilburn took the title. When he finished, the channels were silent for 11 seconds. 11 seconds was a very long time for 5 Drakor leaders to say nothing. Clan Gravak spoke first, young, hungry. The gate offers this power to the next Overlord, not to a specific clan, not to a bloodline, to whoever holds the title. Correct, Veilburn said. Then the title is more valuable than it has ever been. Correct, and you are telling us this. I am telling you this because you would find out eventually, and I would rather you hear it from me than from a spy or a rumor. The gate's offer is real. What you do with that information is between you and your clan. Clan Kethis, silent. Calculating, spoke next. You are inviting competition for the title, Overlord. You understand this. I am acknowledging competition that has existed since the day I took the dais. The gate has simply raised the stakes. Clan Drekval, the oldest. And you, what is your role in this, Veilburn? My role is what it has always been. I am the Overlord. I hold the title until I cannot. What the gate showed me is that my inability to hold it may come sooner than I had planned, and that what follows will be more significant than any succession in Drakor history. You are saying you will die, Clan Vor said. Blunt. Simple. The Vor way. I am saying that the next Overlord will need to earn the title in a way that none of us have ever earned anything. The gate's power is not a gift. It is a test. And the Drakkar do not fail tests. The channels remained open for another hour. The conversation that followed was political, alliances probed, loyalties tested, implications calculated. Kael'vor presided with the steady authority of a being who had just told 5 predators that the meat was on the table and invited them to fight over it. Thorek stood behind him the entire time. His hand rested on the warhammer at his back. Not because he intended to use it, because the clans needed to see that the Overlord's first blade was still standing and still armed and still watching. When the channels closed, Kael'vor sat in the command chair and was quiet for a long time. It has begun, he said. Yes, Overlord, Thorek said. It has. On the Defiance, the clash came earlier than Vasquez expected. Senator Hargrove requested a meeting. Vasquez granted it, not because he wanted to, but because refusing would create a political incident that he could not afford while simultaneously processing a vision that had shown him the woman's death as the price of humanity's survival. She arrived on the bridge during the morning watch. She was shorter than Vasquez, most humans were, with gray hair pulled back in a style that said politician the way a uniform says soldier. Her eyes were sharp. Her posture was certain. She carried a data tablet loaded with proposals, amendments, committee structures, and procedural frameworks that represented, by her estimation, 6 months of careful governance. Captain, she said, I have drafted a proposal for a unified human command structure at the gate. Elected representatives from each faction, rotating chairpersonship, formal voting procedures for all tactical and diplomatic decisions. Vasquez looked at the proposal. It was thorough. It was well-reasoned. It was exactly the kind of document that a competent politician would produce in a stable environment where time was a resource and consensus was achievable. Senator, he said, how long would it take to implement this? 6 months for the initial framework, a year for full ratification across all factions. We don't have 6 months. Captain, governance cannot be rushed. Senator, the Drakkar Overlord just told his 5 clans that the next leader of their species will receive power from the gate. The Velethari High Resonant is undergoing a physical transformation that may split her civilization in half. The Korvan brought something to this sector that our sensors cannot classify. And the gate is radiating visions into the minds of faction leaders while they sleep. He paused. We do not have 6 months. We may not have 6 weeks. Then what do you propose? Vasquez looked at her. He saw the woman from the vision. Principled, intelligent, standing in the path of something she could not comprehend because her principles told her to stand. He saw the 2 futures, the dark corridors, the lit room. I propose that we act now, he said. Consolidate authority under a single command, provisional, emergency powers. Ratification can come later when the emergency is over. A single command, Hargrove said. Her voice was flat. Under whom? Under whoever the factions will follow. And that would be you. I did not say that. You did not need to. She looked at him with the expression of a politician who had heard power, grabs disguised as emergencies before. Captain, I have spent my career preventing exactly this kind of consolidation, military authority over civilian governance, emergency powers that never expire, strong men who promise to give power back when the crisis ends and never do. I am not a strong man, Senator. I am a tired captain on a 40-year-old ship who has not slept properly in weeks. I am not asking for power. I am telling you that if we do not act, the power will be taken by someone who will not ask at all. The conversation ended without resolution. Hargrove left with her proposals. Vasquez stood on the bridge and felt the 2 futures pressing against each other like tectonic plates, slow, inevitable, building toward a fracture that only he could see. On the Luminarch Etherius, the whispers began. It started with the night watch. A junior officer passing the resonance chamber noticed light coming from beneath the sealed door, not the ambient crystal glow that always emanated. from the chamber, but something else, brighter, pulsing, silver-white rather than the familiar violet-blue of Velithari crystal. She reported it to her superior. Her superior looked at the door and said nothing. The silver light pulsed behind it like a heartbeat. By morning, every crew member on the Aetherius knew that something had changed with the High Resonant. The silver, lines that had been confined to Sivalith's temples and neck were now visible on her hands, her forearms, the skin above her collar. They caught the light in ways that normal Veilburn did not, shifting, alive, responding to stimuli that no one else could perceive. Elindra noticed first. She was in the corridor outside the resonance chamber, checking her instruments, a habit she had developed since the first delegation to the entity, when Sivalith emerged. The scholar stopped walking. Her silver eyes went wide. "High Resonant," she said. "Your frequencies have changed." "I know," Sivalith said. "The readings I am getting from you they are not consistent with standard Veilburn progression. The energy patterns are structured, layered. There are frequencies emanating from your body that I have only detected in the entity's core and in the gate itself." "I know, Elindra. This is not damage. No, it is not." Elindra looked at her with the expression of a scientist whose theoretical framework had just walked out of a sealed room and spoken to her. "What is happening to you?" Sivalith looked at the scholar, young, brilliant, terrified, standing, in a corridor on a ship orbiting a gate that had changed everything. She thought about the vision, the council splitting, 3 who knelt, 4 who stood in horror. "Something that cannot be reversed," Sivalith said. "And something that will divide our people when they learn of it. I need you to study me, Elindra. Document what is happening, record the frequencies, map the changes, because when the council asks whether this is transformation or corruption, I want the answer to come from science, not from fear." Elindra nodded. Her hands were shaking. Her instruments were shaking. Everything was shaking except Sivalith, who stood in the corridor with silver light pulsing on her skin and the certainty of a being who had already seen what was coming and had chosen to walk toward it. "I will need full access to the resonance chamber," Elindra said. "You will have it. And I will need to report my findings to the council. Yes, when the time comes. And if my findings confirm what you already know?" Sivalith's white eyes held the scholar's silver ones. 2 Velithari standing in a corridor, on the edge of something that would reshape their civilization. "Then we will need to decide which side of history we are standing on," Sivalith said, "and we will need to decide quickly." Epilogue. The ceasefire was fraying. It had never been formal. No treaty, no agreement. Just the unspoken understanding that shooting at each other while a continent-sized organism and an ancient gate occupied the same sector was counterproductive. But the understanding had been built on a balance of power that no longer existed. The Drakkar had doubled their fleet. The Hammer of Kael'vor alone outgunned every other faction in the sector combined. The Velithari had sealed orders from a council that no one had seen. The humans were arguing with each other loudly enough for every faction to hear. 3 incidents, 3 fault lines, all on the same day. The first, Drakkar against Velithari. A Drakkar patrol, 2 Kelthor-class battle cruisers from the 2nd Strike Fleet, commanded by officers with Clan Gravak allegiances, adjusted their perimeter sweep to pass within sensor range of the Velithari flotilla. Not standard procedure. The previous sweep had maintained a respectful distance. This one came close enough for the Drakkar targeting systems to paint the Luminarch Aetherius with a weapons lock. The lock lasted 3 seconds. Long enough to be detected. Short enough to be denied as accidental. It was not accidental. Officers loyal to Clan Gravak were testing on their own initiative. Their clan leader, light years away, had heard the Overlord's address directly, and the ambition was already trickling down through the ranks, probing the other faction's alertness, measuring response times, establishing which ships could be threatened and which could not. The Velithari response was immediate and silent. 2 Whisper-class scouts materialized on either side of the Drakor patrol, appearing from nowhere as Velithari ships did, their crystal hulls refracting light in ways that made them impossible to track. They matched the patrol's course and speed exactly. They did not hail. They did not threaten. They simply existed, flanking the Drakor battlecruisers with the quiet precision of a species that had been winning confrontations through presence rather than firepower for 6,000 years. The Drakor patrol withdrew. The Whisper-class scouts vanished. Neither side reported the incident through official channels. Both sides logged it internally. The next patrol from Gravak-aligned officers would push closer. The next Velithari. Response would be less patient. The second, Velithari against human. The colony research vessel, the one that had arrived with the human reinforcements crewed by xenobiologists who had spent the journey vibrating with anticipation, requested permission to approach the entity for external scans. The request went to Vasquez, who forwarded it to all factions as a courtesy. The Velithari denied it. Not through the open channel. Through a Whisper-class courier that materialized beside the research vessel and transmitted a single, precisely worded message. The Ascendancy considers unauthorized proximity to the entity a violation of the communion protocols established. During the first delegation, the research vessel will maintain its current position. Communion protocols, Vasquez said when he read the message. There are no communion protocols. There were never communion protocols. We walked in and talked to a tree. He opened a channel to the Etherias. High Resonant, the Velithari do not have authority to restrict human ships from approaching the Bay entity. The entity is not Velithari territory. Sivalith's response came through the courier relay, thin and layered with the new harmonics that her voice had acquired since the vision. The entity is no one's territory, Captain. But the communion requires sensitivity. The research vessel's scanning equipment operates on frequencies that could interfere with the entity's communication attempts. I am asking for caution, not compliance. You are asking through a warship that materialized beside my people without warning. That is not asking. That is posturing. If it were posturing, Captain, there would be more than one ship. The research vessel held its position. Vasquez seethed quietly. The Velithari had never claimed authority over the entity before, but Sivalith's transformation was changing more than her skin. It was changing how the Velithari saw their relationship to the deeper forces in the sector. The entity communed through frequencies Sivalith could now hear. In her mind, that made the entity her responsibility. In Vasquez's mind, it made the Velithari a faction that was overstepping. The third, human against Drakar. A freeborn cargo hauler, the same battered ship that had positioned itself between the fleets during the Korvan standoff, was running a supply transfer to the Defiance when a Drakor Ironside cruiser crewed by officers with Clan Drekvol loyalties demanded it submit to a cargo inspection. The freeborn captain refused, loudly, on the open channel. Drakar vessel, this is the independent freighter margin of error. I am a freeborn captain operating under no faction's authority, carrying medical supplies to a Terran Remnant warship. And I will submit to a cargo inspection when the Drakar Dominion learns to say please, which, based on my experience, will be never. The Ironside powered its forward batteries to stand by. The margin of error's captain did not change course. Vasquez intervened. Drakar vessel, stand down. That ship is operating under Terran Remnant protection. Captain Vasquez, the Drakar Dominion has security jurisdiction over all vessels operating within our established perimeter. Your perimeter is a fiction you invented 3 weeks ago. Stand down or I file a formal protest with Overlord Kael'vor. The Overlord is occupied, Captain. Then he can read my protest when he is finished. Being occupied, stand down. The Ironside stood down. But the margin of error's captain, a woman named Tesh who had been running cargo through hostile space since before Vasquez had his commission, opened a private channel to the Defiance afterward. Captain, that's the 3rd time this week. A Drakor ship has tried to inspect one of ours. The first 2 times I didn't report it because I thought it was standard posturing. This time they powered weapons. Something has changed over there. I know, Vasquez said. Something has changed everywhere. 3 incidents, 3 fault lines. The ceasefire held, but it held the way a cracked hull holds vacuum, through pressure and desperation rather than structural integrity. One more push, one more miscalculation, one more clan leader deciding that the gate's promise was worth more than the fragile piece of Sector RS-7, and the gate stood silent, having delivered its test into the minds of 3 leaders and watched the fractures begin to spread. End of episode 7, and thank you for watching.